This is Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from An Expat's Russia, where we answer your questions about what it's like to live, work, and travel in Russia.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode. Today we're going to talk about what it's like to be an American visiting Russians for dinner. Marcus, I have probably 20 stories, funny stories about visiting Russians and kind of encountering the cultural differences that surround eating. You know, maybe you want to start off. I know you also must have a ton of stories.
Yeah, one story that I vividly remember is when you go to Russia, there are a lot of foods that you haven't ever tried before, right? So I imagine that's the case in many countries, but my mom being German, I was introduced to lots of foods that you don't even, necessarily see in the US. So when I went to Russia, there was a time when we were invited to dinner, and I really do not like liver. And so, like almost in any form, although the Russians will say, if you don't like something, you just didn't prepare it right? That's right. Usually what they say. But we went over to this lady's house. She was very, very nice, very kind. She spoke good English. She prepared liver and buckwheat. I remember just like choking it down because I didn't want, as an American, you don't want to offend somebody, right?
Yes.
I just remember choking it down, and I kind of, just ate it, and I was like, okay, one time I can deal with it. And then after we left, I was like, I made it. And then a couple days later, she invited us over for the next week.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, sure. I didn't really like that, but what are the chances, that I'll have to eat it again? And she made the exact same dish. And this time I just couldn't, hold it in. I just said, I had this, kind of hesitant look on my face when I looked at it. I was like, horror, And she's like, is something wrong, Marcus? And I was like, I'm sorry, but I hate liver. And she said, why didn't you tell me last week? I made the same thing. I was like, I know. I was trying to be, polite. So,
right.
On one hand, Russians are very straightforward, but on the other hand, sometimes when it comes to food, they will get offended if you don't try something. And I was afraid of offending.
Well, I don't think I've ever had someone get offended with me for not wanting to try something in Russia. It's more usually the way it works, right? And this is something I encountered all the time at my wife's grandmother's. Like we would go there and, she'd have all kinds of stuff prepared on the table. And, you take what you want and you put it on your plate. And her grandmother would always just ask me, Matt, do you not like X? You didn't take any. And as an American, you're like, oh man, that means I need to take some. So, you take some. And then
be polite.
Yeah, and she takes that to mean that, I want to eat it or I like it. And then, she'll ask like, что, невкусно? Is it not any good? And I'm like, oh yeah, I just getting to it. I haven't eaten that part yet of the plate. I never felt a pressure to try something, I guess, but there was always like this Americanness in me that felt like I had to take something. Like they will keep asking until you tell them, no, I don't want that.
Right.
I learned that a little bit better.
Or
with
you
my
give
wife's
them an
parents.
excuse why you can't, like I'm allergic or I don't know, whatever it is.
Right. So with my wife's parents, for example, all I would just say is, I don't like that. It's gotten much easier. So, we were at my wife's parents' house and, my wife tells her parents that I don't like dill. She said, I don't like dill. So like her mom would try not to put dill on anything. And her dad would always say, if they were making something that was going to have dill in it, he would always say, oh, just remember, Matt doesn't like dill. Like every time dill came up or dill was in a dish, then we would go to her grandmother's house and her grandmother would make something and there was dill in it and her grandmother would say, Matt, do you want to try this? And her dad would step in and be like, no, Matt doesn't like dill. And so like there's...
The funny thing is almost everything has dill in it.
Right. I mean, so they asked me, do you like dill? And no, I don't really like dill if it's added to a salad. Okay, that's totally fine. But like when an American says they don't like something, more or less it means, I don't want like the main feature of my dish to be, what I don't like. Whereas, if it's just a slight condiment or sprinkled on the top of potatoes, it doesn't bother me, right?
Right.
But if you say you don't like something in terms of food in Russia, they take that very, very serious. If you say you like something, they take it just as far. Because I told I told my mother-in-law that I like raspberries. I'll never forget this story. My wife and I were still sleeping. It was early. I don't know, like 7:30 in the morning. My mother-in-law comes in and she says, "Matt, I picked some raspberries for you." And I'm not even kidding. There was 2 kilograms of raspberries in the bucket. And so like I'm eating them. I eat a lot of them, but it's still just a small part of the bucket. And so then her mom says, do you not like raspberries? Are they not any good? I was like, there's 2 kilograms of them. I like them, but I can't eat them all right now. Oh. But that's happened with so many different foods. That's hilarious every time though.
I've had this experience where, so anybody who's spent New Year's in Russia, that's the main event in Russia, right? So Russians will gather around the table, approaching midnight. The table, it's a feast, really.
Right.
Like there's salads and meats and smoked sausages, and there has to be, caviar. Although, curiously enough, I didn't think about this till just now. Russians love soup, right? They eat a lot of soup, but soup is not one of the main dishes for New Year's. Anyway, we get around the New Year's table, and I'm dishing up, what I want to eat, and if I miss something, if I miss a salad or whatever, my plate is like full of food. I miss something. I didn't put something on my plate. My mother-in-law or sometimes my wife will say, "What, you don't want any of that salad? What, you don't want any of the fish?" And I'm like, I need to start somewhere. Let me start with this, and then I'll move on to, So they'll kind of like, "Hey, you didn't put it on your table or your plate. Right. You probably don't like it." And I was like, "I don't have any more space. I need to get this over with first."
But again, this is kind of like the same thing that I was kind of talking about at the beginning. As an American, I don't know about you, but I was brought up to try everything. Even if you just take a little bit, you should try everything that's offered. And so when you go to Russia, you feel this obligation that you should try everything, even if it's just a little bit. But then if you don't try something, then they ask you why you didn't try it. If you do try something, knowing that you won't like it, they're going to ask you, do you like it or not? And for an American, that's an awkward question.
Right. I've come up with a trick where I will eat almost anything just to try it, but there are some things that I don't like, walnuts or pecans or something, some nuts I don't like. I just don't like the flavor or the texture. And so I was kind of tired of people asking me, do you want this? Do you want this? Like certain dishes or something that always have that. For example, they make this beet salad with walnuts and prunes and and mayonnaise. And my wife loves it. I don't like it because of the walnuts, but I would just tell people I'm allergic to nuts. Just because I wanted to skip the conversation about like, I prepared it differently today. Like, this is my recipe. And that's what they would say because, everyone else makes it a different way. So I was going to ask you.
I had that backfire on me once. I said that I was lactose intolerant, which is true. And then they take that to mean like anything that could ever be derived from milk. Like I say straight up, I'm lactose intolerant, but I can eat cheese. And every time, like for the longest time with my wife's family, the cheese would come out and they'd be like, "Oh, Matt can't eat cheese." But maybe be with their extended family, right? And I'm just sitting there like, it's just kind of funny.
But the funny thing is, when you first told me that, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, you're lactose intolerant. I'm thinking of all the Russian dairy products that they don't even have in the US. For example, ryazhenka, kefir. Now they have kefir, but it's kind of different. Tvorog, like that's a whole staple.
At the regular grocery stores, we have tvorog.
Yeah?
Literally Russian style, yeah. It's made by a family who moved from Russia or Ukraine to the US, and they started this brand. It's called Lifeway, and they have ryazhenka, kefir, tvorog, all the Russian style ones. And
But is it named
groceries-
tworog? It's not
No,
an
it's
American.
called farmer's cheese. If you call it tworog, then no one will
okay.
know what it is. But it's
Right,
exactly the
right.
same consistency as tworog in Russia.
Interesting. Well, I was gonna ask you. You brought this up earlier. You have to try something, right? So when I was over at somebody's house for dinner, I saw some weird food that I didn't really want to try, but out of trying to
Sure.
be polite, was there something that you kind of hesitantly tried that you didn't really want to, but
I always ask if it looks like there could be any trace of milk or cream in something. Kind of, there's actually not a lot. So when you're lactose intolerant, you can't do, like milk products, like direct milk products. But things like
Right.
yogurt, sour cream, cheese, most of them don't have any lactose in them, so it's okay. You just really have to watch out. People say kefir is okay, but I don't know, just the smell turns me off. So
there were some instances where, like for example, an old babushka, right, a Russian grandma, she made sour cream by putting milk on her windowsill for several days in the sun.
have you
And
ever
I was
heard
like, I've never heard of that, right?
have you ever heard of Chinese grip?
Yes. I've never tried it.
So basically it's kombucha but made at home. So
Right.
basically what they do is they put tea and then they let it grow like fungus in it and then they drink it. That's a thing in Russia. But it's essentially the same thing as kombucha, which is now popular in the US. My wife's grandmother once had it and she asked if I wanted it. I said, no, I'm okay.
And
But I've never
another
heard of
one-
someone making their own sour cream.
Yeah. Another one is I sat down to eat a bowl of soup, and the fish head was in the soup, and I had never experienced. I mean, that was years ago, but and again, the same lady. She's like, "Here's have some, uha or whatever, some fish soup," and I sat down to put my spoon in it, and there's this like fish head with the eyeball still in there, and I was like, out of. And that was in the beginning when I didn't speak Russian, so I didn't even know how to politely
Sure.
say no, thank you.
Right.
So it was like, oh,
Well, actually, I
dang
have
it,
a
now
funny story. I never realized how uncommon it was to have fish without the head on it in the US. It's practically, I mean, you never get that. Now it's becoming a little bit more popular because I think it's more of a European way of serving fish. But my parents came over for my wedding, and at our wedding it was a grilled fish or beef, I think. I don't remember, but not important. And so my mom, she was like, "Oh, I'll take the fish." And then they brought the fish, and it was like the whole fish with the head on. And she was like, okay, I want to switch to the beef. I thought that was strange because, again, like very early adult life, I moved to Russia, and like when my wife ordered fish at a restaurant, that's what she got. And
Right.
I was actually not a big fish eater before that, so it was not really a surprise to me. But then, the more Americans I talked to, it's funny. I never really heard that the fish head was an obstacle.
At first it was, but then it wasn't. So there are a lot of really good salads: vinaigrette, olivier. I like mimosa, and they're all made differently by Russians, right? Have you ever had this where you
Right.
love
Yeah, of
a
course.
soup or a salad at somebody's house, and you go to another, and you're like excited to eat it, and
Right,
you're
and
just
then-
let down because it's totally different.
Sometimes it can be, yeah, exactly, a totally different recipe almost. My favorite soup is salyanka, which is like a kind of sour, spicy type of soup. My mother-in-law makes it great. Usually it's great at like cheaper places, actually. But I've been disappointed many, many times when I've had people make salyanka for me, because you have to add like pickle juice and all the olive juice, and if it's not in the right proportions, it doesn't taste right.
Well, I've gotten to the point where if they ask, "Hey, do you want some olivier?" I would ask, "What kind of meat does it have in it?" Or I don't like onions that much, so if they say, "Do you want some of this salad?" and I ask them, "Is there onions in it?" Like selyotka pod shubay, for example, the beet herring soup. If that has onions, it's not my favorite. But I would ask the Russians, like, "Do you have it in?" And they would respond, for example, that's how it's made. Like, that's the only recipe. But I know there's, you know, for example, Olivier has like peas, potatoes, carrots, you know, mixed with mayonnaise, and also eggs, and also like some type of meat. I like it with bologna, which is kind of the way that I was introduced to it. But some people make it with chicken, like boiled chicken.
Yeah. Oh, I've even seen ham.
And yeah, I mean, I don't like the chicken that much, so I would ask, and sometimes they'd get offended, like, no, this is the way to eat it, you know, this is the way you have to make it. So
that's funny. But anyway, so those are kind of some of the funny instances and stories we've had surrounding food in Russia. If you're a foreigner and you've been to Russia, let us know in the comments what kind of funny or interesting experiences you've had dining at Russians' homes, or, you know, with your friends. I think there's lots of cultural differences in this area, and it's always kind of funny to laugh about them later. See you in the next video. And I was like, wait, what? Oh, man.
Bless you.
I was trying so hard.